On today's Tech Help for Churches, podcasting when you have a family. Hi, and welcome again to Tech Help for Churches. This is the show where every week I help you with new media, social media, just using the internet for your church. My name is Paul Allen Clifford. So it occurred to me that there is a very important piece of the puzzle of how I podcast that might help some of you out in podcast land. It might help some pastors, might help lay people that are podcasting for their churches. Maybe you're the volunteer children's pastor and you're not really paid, and you really want to make a podcast to help parents out, for example. But the reason you do that is because you've got 5 kids of your own. So how do you go about it? Well, I have some ideas. Now, granted, I don't have 5 kids, I just have 2. Although sometimes, especially the younger one, can feel like about 4 kids. So it's okay. You know, it's not exactly the same thing. I'm not yet on zone defense. It's still man-to-man in my house, but still just something for you to consider as we're talking about how to go about podcasting when you have a family. The first thing that I want you to consider is finding the best space to podcast. It could be that in your house there is a spot where maybe the kids are afraid to go to. You know, maybe it's like the creepy basement. Maybe it is a walk-in closet in your room where they just don't think to look there. And if your spouse is home, then they just wouldn't bother looking there. Those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. Just finding a good location. You'll notice that I'm in a room. This is a room in my house, and it's a place that I've kind of claimed as my own, as my own home office. So the kids do come in here from time to time, but when I shut the door, they tend to leave me alone. So it's helpful to have a space like that in your house. Next, you can plan to record when they are either not around, who is your friend, or when they're asleep. As it turns out, one of the great things about kids is they require more sleep than adults. So my 10-year-old, who's very rambunctious and keeps asking me when she can be on the podcast with me, and I'm trying to find a good time. Maybe I'll take a picture and throw her in the cover art for this episode. She is more easily occupied now that she's 10 than when she was 8 or than when she was 5. You see, I started not podcasting in general. My podcast is a couple years older than hers, my Thursday show at least. But when I first started working for myself on this ministry, she was 5. Very difficult to podcast with her in the house back then. Today, not so much, but she has this YouTube addiction, and one of the shows that she listens to has very loud theme music. So, again, difficult to podcast with her in the house. But that doesn't mean it's impossible, because of the advantage of the fact that even at 10, she sleeps about 10 to 12 hours. So that gives me a couple of hours after she's gone to bed and is firmly asleep before I go to bed. So that's a nice little advantage that I have. Something else that you can do is record in batches. Now, if you've got a 2-hour marathon show, you're not going to record 8 hours worth of podcast all at once. But if you've got a 15-minute show, why not batch those bad boys and record 4 of them at once? And that way you can edit or you can process them when more noise is around. Another suggestion is to get ahead. Now, this might sound similar to recording in batches, but what I mean is if you've always got a backup podcast, and this is something that I'm preaching to myself as well as to you, it's easier to let life get in the way than if, you know, let's say you have a show that you're planning on releasing on Monday, and Sunday night your kid has an emergency, you have to take them to the hospital. Not something that you can work around, really. You can't plan for that. That just happens. But if you already had a podcast in the can that was scheduled to go live Monday, no harm, no foul. You could do the next suggestion, by the way. So your child is fine. They get out of the hospital on Sunday night. No big deal. False alarm. It's wee hours of the morning, but you have a backup time. Your backup recording time is Tuesday evening. Well, no problem because you already have a show in the can. You release Mondays, then you record Tuesdays. Maybe you record 2 weeks ahead, and you've got some room in your schedule for when life shows up. Another thing is you could have alternate or quiet activities for the children. Maybe they're used to running around and screaming, but if you know that there's something that really engages your child, like my 10-year-old, my 15-year-old, what really engages her is a good book. I'm a big fan of that. So she goes into her room with the latest of the Percy Jackson series or the Hunger Games. She's big into some of those fantasy kind of things. Percy Jackson, a little old for her, but sometimes she reads them just for nostalgia's sake. So she's taken care of. Well, what about the 10-year-old? If I give her a craft, a lot of times that'll occupy her for a half an hour or an hour, etc. So pay attention to what occupies your child where they don't need as much supervision, or maybe your spouse can supervise, but it's not a high intensity supervision, and do that. You can always send your kids during the summer out on a walk with your spouse. Have everyone go to McDonald's, to the plate place, and ice cream. Things like that where you could have your child occupied for a short amount of time while you record the show that you do every week or every month or however often it comes on. And finally, I want you to plan for the eventuality that you will be interrupted. When you're really into something, sometimes it can be really frustrating to be interrupted and lose your flow. And I get it that for every minute you're interrupted, you're probably knocked out of your flow for half an hour. That happens to me all the time. That's why I try and get everything done before the kids come home. Because even when I engage my children in a quiet activity for a certain amount of time, if they have a question, they'll come in like 12 times in a row to ask me details of the question that I try and anticipate, but I'm not always good at it. So it's really a better plan to instead plan for this eventuality and plan to have a good attitude about it. Plan to think, well, maybe I was about to say something that wouldn't be as helpful as what I'll say when I re-record. Maybe that will be something that will really touch someone's heart. So have a good attitude, plan for those interruptions, and deal with them appropriately. If you like this content, I bet you'd like my email newsletter, so head on over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/newsletter, and there you can pick up a copy, along with some tips, tricks, etc. In fact, I'm sending out one today with all kinds of links to my shows, talk about the content that I've produced, and talking about my community, Church Tech U. If that's something that interests you, by all means, subscribe to the email newsletter and you'll get plenty of updates and discounts, just saying, on that and many of my courses. Until next time, this is Paul Allen Clifford with TrinityDigitalMedia.com. Go out and change eternity. Why are you still here? Do you think that I'm going to tell you that if you subscribe and then click on the bell icon that you'll be one of the first people to watch a video and maybe win some sort of prize? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to tell you to do, so do that.